Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our complimentary webinar, Recognition During Onboarding, First Impressions Count. My name is Nissa, and I will be your moderator for this session. Today's presenters are Daria Friedman, Principal Analyst, Talent Acquisition for Brandon Hall Group, Jeff Jelinas, VP of People for Engage2Excel, and Emily Gatton, VP of Solution for Engage2Excel. I would like to extend a thank you to Engage2Excel for sponsoring today's webinar. They help companies engage employees from pre-hire to retirement to improve talent acquisition, performance, and retention. Be sure to visit their website at www.engage2excel.com for more information. I'm going to invite Emily Gatton to tell us a little bit more about their mission and initiatives of Engage2Excel.
Thank you, Nissa, and hello, everyone. Engage2Excel's mission is to help improve engagement and performance throughout the talent lifecycle, from the moment a candidate first interacts with the organization all the way to retirement. We offer talent acquisition solutions, employee engagement surveys to measure engagement, and recognition and reward solutions to help drive the right behaviors and increase business performance. One of the unique capabilities of Engage2Excel is the ability to demonstrate ROI through our analytics solution. I look forward to sharing best practices later in the presentation.
Thank you, Emily. Now a little bit about Brandon Hall Group. We are a research and analyst firm that empowers excellence in organizations around the world through our research and tools. Our vision is to inspire a better workplace experience. We have world-class research, data, and expertise across all areas in human capital management. The Brandon Hall Group research and data featured in this webinar came from our product Data Now. Data Now gives real-time relevant industry data filtered by market size, revenue, geography, and high-performing organizations. To gain access to this one-of-a-kind benchmarking tool, visit www.datanow.brandonhall.com. Currently, we have open surveys in recruitment marketing practices, extended enterprise learning, state of talent acquisition, and HCM technology. We would love to hear from you. In exchange, you could receive free gift cards, research reports, and more. To participate, please visit our website, www.brandonhall.com, and click on Open Surveys. This presentation is being recorded. The playback and slides will be provided to everyone within 48 hours of the webinar in a follow-up email. If you would like to ask a question, please do so by typing it into the question box for our presenters. And with that, I'll turn it over to Daria so we can get started with the agenda.
Terrific. Thank you, Nissa. I'm so pleased to be here along with Jeff and Emily from Engage2Excel to talk about recognition during onboarding. As we all know, how we onboard new talent impacts how quickly they become productive. But what we typically don't think about is how to recognize those new hires during onboarding. And by recognizing new hires, I mean acknowledging their importance and potential contribution to the company and how happy you are to bring them along as one of your employees. It's important to remember that new hires are at great risk during this time, and if they have a poor first experience, that really increases the likelihood of them considering leaving the organizations. So first impressions really do count during onboarding. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is how engagement, recognition, and onboarding all fit together. Then I'll dive into the current onboarding landscape and some best practices, and Jeff and Emily will give their perspective on how and when to recognize and engage new hires, as well as specific pre-boarding and onboarding practices. I really look forward to the Q&A session, so please don't wait until the end to write a question or comment in the question box. So now let's move off to the poll, because that's how I love to begin all webinars. And the reason why I like to do that is I want to see what's on your mind and how your responses compared to what our survey says. So if you could take just a really quick moment to answer this one question, which metrics are most important in measuring onboarding process effectiveness? Is it time to productivity, new hire retention, new hire engagement, direct manager feedback, first year performance reviews? And so Nissa, please let me know when most of our attendees have had a chance to take this little poll. And, you know, I love metrics, and I think the way in which an organization uses metrics and the importance that they attribute it to it kind of leads how they manage the process or how they're going to manage the onboarding process. So if everyone could take a moment now and answer this question, and we'll see what you say.
We have about 70% of the audience that have voted, so we're just going to leave it open for another couple seconds to get those last minute votes.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. Looking forward to the responses.
Then I'm going to go ahead and close it right now. Thank you for everyone.
Okay. Okay, very interesting. Time, let's see, the top response is new hire retention. Second top, new hire engagement at 60%. Time to productivity at 40%. Direct manager feedback, 22%. And first year performance reviews at 18%. That's really interesting because if we go on to the next slide, you'll see that the results are very similar to what we found out. And so what you see here is a comparison between high-performing organizations and other organizations. And just because we're going to continue this kind of trend about high-performing organizations and others, high-performing organizations have seen an improvement in their key metrics over the past year, and others have not. And so as you can see, our results directly mimic yours. New hire retention and new hire engagement are the most important onboarding metrics. And the reason why I asked this poll question is because recognition, the topic for today's discussion, has a tremendous impact on both new hire engagement and new hire retention. So let's dig a little deeper into the human capital practices around engagement, recognition, and onboarding to see how they all fit together. So let's look at our framework and start with, well, first let's look at what is employee engagement. So here is Brandon Hall Group's definition of employee engagement. And I personally feel that it really captures the employee behavior, spirit, and beliefs that are necessary to drive organizational performance. So engaged employees are committed to, aligned with, and enthusiastic about their work and the culture, and they also make personal contributions to drive organizational success and excellence. And so you may recall that organizations used to administer employee satisfaction surveys, but they really did not measure employees' enthusiasm or their personal contributions towards the organizational goals. Employee engagement is so much deeper than that. And I'm thinking, I'm wondering, Jeff, whether your organization, how you look at, what's your perspective on employee engagement?
Yeah, thanks for asking. And there are a lot of definitions out there. We define employee engagement in terms of the extent in which employees are motivated to contribute to organizational success, and they're willing to apply discretionary effort to accomplishing those tasks that are important to the achievement of their goals. So I think for us, Daria, it really is that discretionary effort, and how do you get new hires and employees at that state where they're willing to apply that discretionary effort.
Yes, and I really agree with what you have to say. Discretionary effort is really important. And in a sense, personal contributions are really kind of speaking to that discretionary effort. So another aspect that's important about engagement is that recognition is integral to being engaged, as you'll see by our next slide. So here's Brandon Hall Group's High Performance Engagement Framework. And all our frameworks are based on the research that we conduct. And so when you see this like design, just think of it as a roadmap or a blueprint that identifies all the components of developing a successful practice area like engagement. And while the components are going to be the same across all organizations, the practices within the components and the extent to which the organization emphasizes each component is going to be different. And so if you look at the innermost circle, the organizational performance excellence, that is the goal of engagement. Engagement drives organizational performance excellence. And surrounding that goal are the different components of engagement that you should include in your engagement strategy. And so, of course, you got career development, and then there it is, rewards and recognition. That's a great way to reinforce the type of behavior that you would like from your organizations. Then you go into phase 3, which is wellness or well-being, phase 4, team building activities, and phase 5, coaching and mentoring. And so you need all of these components to really have an effective and successful engagement strategy. Now, surrounding this plan, I'm just going to go quickly through this framework, is the contextual frame. And that only signifies that the way in which you practice engagement is going to be impacted by the organization's technology, culture, governance, and measurement. And then underneath are the success levers. That's just what needs to be in place in order to have a successful engagement strategy. And it's kind of the basics, the compensation and bonus model, change management, executive ownership, etc. So, that's the way our frameworks look. And now let's look at onboarding and see how rewards and recognition fits there. Okay, so again, as I mentioned before, we have the goal in the middle of onboarding, and this is based on our research that the goal is to optimize engagement, which requires recognition and rewards, and optimize time to proficiency. And in order to do that, you need to go through these different phases of the onboarding process, and I'll go through them rather quickly because I just want us all to be using the same terminology. Pre-boarding starts right after the new hire signs the offer letter, but it ends right before day 1, and that's the time that you introduce the new hire to the culture, people, and process. Phase 2 is orientation, and that's your typical orientation day where there'll be policies, benefits, missions, and just all this documentation gets accomplished. But right now I'm going to tell you that there's a lot of transformation going on in day 1, and that there are many organizations that are really striving to make a big impact on the new hires, on engagement and recognition during day 1. Then phase 3 is assimilation, and that's really when you start training your new hire for the position. That's when there's collaboration and motivation. And then phase 4 is where there's assessment, and that's so that you can continuously evaluate your process and make sure that your new hires are on the right road in their career. So let's look at some examples of how you might recognize new hires within each of these components, because that's what's really important. So obviously, right after your new hire signs the offer letter, the big thing to do is to welcome them with an email or letter and thank them after the letter is signed. And then a lot of organizations have pre-boarding portals, and those are just portals where all the material and the visuals and all the information the new hire needs is available to that new hire. And a great activity during pre-boarding is to have the new hire prepare the way they're going to introduce themselves, create a profile to the other employees. So, and not just, what their skills are and what they did and what they want to accomplish, but also some interesting things in terms of who they are as a person, activities they like, et cetera. It just will help make the transition, more interactive. And then, of course, in the portal, you can have social networking. You could share LinkedIn profiles, set expectations for the onboarding process. You might introduce them to their mentors. I mean, all of that really helps to recognize the new hire and keep them motivated so that when they start working for the organization, they're ready to go. And then looking on to the day one, that again is the welcome again. There's the two-way introductions. There could be assimilation activities like lunches. There could be games. There's a variety of ways in which you can really motivate new hires during day one. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to be talking about that a little later on. In terms of throughout onboarding, there's that's when the new hire is really into their training activities. And it's important to remember to recognize your new hires when they achieve various onboarding milestones, like they say they've completed a course or took an assessment or whatever. It's important to recognize those achievements. And so, Jeff, I'm wondering how you see things in terms of recognizing new hires during onboarding.
Yeah, I think to your last point, Daria, we're seeing a lot of our clients start to recognize for those career and performance milestones a lot sooner in an individual's career, starting with onboarding. So a lot of those traditional milestones that you would have seen historically are being really pushed up much sooner in the process.
Yeah, great. Okay, so now I know I've been talking about onboarding, but engagement really begins before onboarding. It actually begins during recruitment. And so I'd love to talk to you a little bit about our M theory, which really depicts how engagement changes throughout the talent life cycle. And as you can see with this M, there are upswings and downswings that really impact engagement and your organization's performance. So let's look at the first upswing or upside of the M, and that represents when candidates go through the recruitment process. Here, most organizations are doing everything they can to woo and engage that candidate. They want them to apply, read their content, engage with recruiters, and so forth. And then the offer letter arrives, and the candidate, new hire, is totally engaged, and now we're at the top of that M. But what happens when that new hire comes into work? Unfortunately, sometimes the onboarding process is just not as tight as it could be. Employees may come to their first day and have to figure out everything on their own. I'm not saying every organization does this, but there are many that do that. Their desk or work site might not be ready, and they barely get acknowledged. So now they're on the downswing, and engagement plummets. Some time passes, and the new hires have survived the onboarding process, and they begin to become a great contributor, and the organization starts paying attention to them, and development opportunities occur. Engagement is on the upswing again. And then, as employees move on in tenure, then there's a slow erosion again as employees feel less valued, and and unfortunately, some organizations don't do a good job of keeping their more tenured employees engaged. And then they begin to slip down the other side of the M again. So, you know what? We don't want to put our employees and recruits on this roller coaster. We want to have a steady, gradual, and progressive building of engagement through the life cycle. And recognition and rewards is a way in which you can smooth out this roller coaster of engagement. So now, Jeff, would love to hear about how organizations can influence engagement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Daria. And through our collaboration with Dr. Jack Wiley, we've really sought to understand not just what employees want, but also what candidates want to improve an organization's overall engagement. But before sharing some of those findings, I want to highlight a little bit more about Dr. Wiley's RESPECT framework, as that is the basis for our research. So Dr. Wiley's RESPECT framework is based on 30 years of data around what employees most want from their employer, and that link to engagement and performance. RESPECT is an acronym that stands for what employees most want, and that is the following: recognition, exciting work, security, pay, which primarily pertains to fair pay, education and career growth, conditions, which are really speaking to those positive and social working conditions, and then truth, primarily from senior leadership. And not surprisingly, 25% say fair pay, but you'll see that the next dimension is recognition. And really the bottom line there is that people want to feel appreciated. So some very interesting data. And as we look at our Trendicator survey on the next slide, Nisa, we see that, candidates join organizations and leave organizations. We looked at the data from a RESPECT standpoint, and what you can see is that from a 2017 Trendicators report, based on our December survey of 1,500 individuals across the U.S., and that includes both active and passive job seekers. So we had 940 active job seekers, 507 passive job seekers. And to the left, you'll see that the top reasons why candidates accept job offers includes, number one, being treated with dignity and respect during the hiring process, which really suggests that early recognition is important. To the right, you'll see the top reasons why employees leave organizations, and there too, number one reason, lack of recognition. You'll also notice that the top three reasons here are very similar, just ordered differently. So again, there's a real importance in recognition throughout the candidate-employee continuum, as well as making sure that work is meaningful and relevant. So, Lisa, on the next slide, we wanted to provide some ways that you can create an engaging recruiting experience. And that's part of, our hope with this webcast is giving you some actionable tips. And we see a real need for HR and recruiting professionals to build the elements of respect into the candidate experience. And here's some examples. So for instance, if you were doing a recruitment process and you were speaking to a management candidate, you might notice on that candidate's resume that candidate was instrumental in helping to achieve a certain goal at the organization. Maybe it was reducing costs in his or her previous position. Be sure to congratulate that candidate. That simple personal touch really helps warm up the engagement process. You can also recognize candidates for positive behaviors that they exhibit along the way. With respect to exciting work, be sure to point out the differentiators of the company, the job, or even the hiring manager. Recruitment is marketing. With respect to security, you can help instill that feeling of security by communicating the vision for the team, department, and your organization. And then moving on to fair pay, it's often helpful to explain pay practices and timing. So for example, if a candidate is joining the organization at the beginning of the year and it's planning perhaps a merit increase cycle mid-year, being sure to communicate with that new hire around whether they'd be eligible for that process is important. Regarding education and career growth, any examples of growth and development are positive, including any continuing education benefits. Explaining the social and physical work conditions is important too. So for example, how do people communicate? If there's a chat interface that the organization uses, perhaps Skype or Yammer or HipChat, Is it an expectation to be signed in and using that interface? And then lastly, engage candidates on what those performance expectations are from senior leadership. So there's a lot of ways, Daria, that you can build in things during the recruitment process to really move the needle early on from an engagement perspective. Next slide, Nissa. Our trend indicators research also found that recognition during the hiring process is particularly important to millennials, more so than any other generation. And you'll see here that approximately 80% of millennials rate recognition as either very important or important during that pre-hiring phase, during onboarding, as well as after onboarding is complete. So again, those generational preferences really do matter. And then furthermore, we see some remarkable differences between active and passive job seekers on this next slide. So for example, active job seekers, of which the majority are millennials, we see that early recognition and praise are very important. And you can turn that into a tactic, as I mentioned earlier. We also find active candidates to be much more active in social media than passive candidates. However, our research also shows that finding passive candidates can have a tremendous payoff, as the acceptance rate for passive is about 2.5 times higher than active candidates. Another interesting point is that passive candidates are a lot less comfortable with video interviewing. So we've found a lot of interesting insights in this study that we've done. And Daria, I think when you're thinking about engagement during that hiring and onboarding process, it's really important to remember that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't often work.
Thanks, Jeff. That's so interesting, especially about millennials and how important they feel recognition is during the entire onboarding process. Very interesting. And so now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the current onboarding landscape and what's really happening there. And so if we look at onboarding, and it's not shown in this slide, but our talent acquisition technology survey pointed out that onboarding is really a top priority for organizations, both with respect to technology and processes. But while it's a top priority, many organizations are only somewhat or not at all satisfied with their onboarding process. And what they want to improve by far, Nissa, next slide, is the new hire experience. And the new hire experience is important because employee engagement and drives organizational productivity and performance. And that's what relates to new hire experience. And recognition can play a strong role in improving the new hire experience and engagement practices during onboarding. But, our research also pointed out that there's kind of an issue with new hire engagement during onboarding. And so our research, there is a problem with engagement in terms of the extent to which key employee segments participate in engagement activities and promote the organization internally and externally. And our engagement survey addressed that very question. And what we see is that only a minority of organizations, a third or less, indicate that most of their experienced new hires or university grad new hires participate in engagement efforts and promote the organization internally and externally. So when you compare that to other key segments like critical talent and executive leadership, you see that engagement among those segments for those organizations is fairly low. And so, overall, I think that organizations have an issue with workforce, with their engaged workforce, but I think it's particularly severe among new hires. And then another issue that's impacting new hire engagement is how we measure new hire engagement. And so, unfortunately, many organizations are not even measuring engagement on a consistent basis during the first year of employment. In truth, as a result, many organizations don't even realize the extent to which their new hires are engaged. So if you look at the top two bars, the first 30, 60, 90 days, that's the typical best practice for measuring engagement during the onboarding process. And we see that we have only a minority of organizations conducting those surveys, even high-performing organizations, during that time. And at the bottom of the chart, you see that many organizations are not measuring new hire engagement at all, or they're measuring it on an ad hoc basis. And this is true for both high-performing organizations, although it's less true for high-performing organizations, but it's especially true for other organizations. And so, unfortunately, as I said before, many organizations do not even know whether their new hires are acclimating or are engaged with the organization. Let's look at best practices now in terms of, besides conducting surveys at 30, 60, and 90 days. So in terms of the activities that are considered valuable for engagement, our engagement research shows that employee recognition programs ranked near the top, especially among high-performance organizations. And that makes sense because recognition is one of the best ways to reinforce performance behaviors that are desired. And looking at this chart as a whole, through an onboarding perspective, all of these activities like performance reviews, career development and paths, coaching and mentoring should be mentioned during onboarding so that the new hire knows what to expect during their tenure with the organization. Now Jeff, I'm curious about what you see in terms of pre-boarding.
Yeah, and we actually thought it'd be a good idea to share some of what candidates expect to happen during the pre-boarding phase, especially since there's been so much talk about this pre-boarding period. And these are the findings from our 2000 Trend Indicators report. And it's no surprise that, some of the tactical activities like the completion of new hire paperwork, background checks, those type of things fall at the top of the list. But if you look closer, you really see some interesting things. So, consider going the extra mile with, for example, a new hire portal, a meet and greet with senior leadership team members, or a pairing of the new hire with a mentor. It's also interesting that from this data, we can see that today's candidates are expecting activities like a review of benefits or a facility tour, if applicable, to happen before day one. A lot of these things have been historically day one activities. So I think organizations really need to make sure that they have a great plan in place for that time between offer acceptance and first day on the job.
That's really great. Thank you, Jeff. So I thought I would give you an example of a great onboarding program that includes activities related to engagement and recognition. And so I'm sure many of you are familiar with Zynga. Zynga is an online gaming company, and they won the Silver Award from Brandon Hall Group for their onboarding program. And so like many other organizations, Zynga experienced some restructuring, some product transitioning, and some turnover. And as a result of these situations, Zynga realized they needed to really overhaul their onboarding to increase engagement, make the new hires feel valued and aligned with their mission, which is connecting the world through games. So that really makes sense. To do that, they developed their onboarding program called Zone, which is Zynga Orientation for New Employees. First, Zynga issued a welcome email to send to new hires within the first 24 hours of accepting an offer. The welcome email introduced the manager of onboarding, an employee experience. They explained the next steps like paperwork. They introduced the Zone program, and they invited them to join the Zynga community of play by playing some games. So that's a really fun way to introduce new hires to Zynga, and it's aligned with their brand, so it's really great. And for the actual onboarding, Zynga created as many game elements as they could. For instance, they awarded points to new hires for either asking a question, which they got 1 point, 2 points for answering a question, 3 points for making the group laugh, etc. And Zynga used the points as a way to recognize and engage employees and encourage participation. So they didn't just leave it to just that one game. They created other games like Zynga, which is like bingo, another game, Purple Monkey Dishwasher, I don't want to go into that, but it's fun, a sudden death quiz, and a scavenger hunt at their headquarters. The winner of all the games could select a prize from a variety of rare Zynga-branded merchandise. In addition to all the games, all new hires received some Zynga-branded swag like a hoodie. All of these efforts from Zynga made onboarding interactive, engaging, and made the new hires feel valued and aligned with the company vision. And now I'd love to introduce Emily, who's going to give you Engage2Excel's perspective.
Great, thank you. I love that Zynga example. I think it's a perfect example of how your recognition programs should be fun. They should align with your brand and your culture, and really how Swag can introduce a new employee to your organization, to your brand, and really connect them with their team so they have the same gear as their peers. So I want to talk for just a minute about how to create a great first impression. We talked in that example and previously of how those gifts during that pre-boarding or onboarding phase can be very well received. They tend to be received best when they're functional. So coffee mugs or tumblers, maybe lunch bags, badge reels. But our research shows that even though sending the gift makes a big difference, timing is also an important factor to consider when you're trying to achieve the biggest impact. In fact, almost 30% of candidates would prefer the personalized gifts to arrive sometime between offer acceptance and the first day on the job, so during that pre-boarding phase. It's a great way to get the employee excited about your organization, and really it shares the enthusiasm that they have about their new job with their family, since they're receiving it prior to the first day, and that's the family that they're ultimately working to support. Sending gifts at the time of offer came in a close second with 26%, and the first day ranked third with 18%. As you can see from the numbers, though, sending personalized gifts shortly after the first day is too late if you want to maximize your return. During pre-boarding, we also recommend creating fun ways for the new hire's direct supervisor to say welcome, and embedding social recognition and interaction is a way to also communicate what to expect during the first few days. So at Engage2Excel, we offer a social onboarding experience that allows the manager to do just that. They can send an e-card or upload a welcome photo or video from the team. Their peers can participate as well. Additional cards or images are included to say welcome, maybe from the leadership team, share information about the company culture and values, or even just communicate first day logistics, such as when and where to arrive. You may be doing similar tasks in your organization, but I just love how easy this is to make it fun and a memorable first impression. And just imagine the impact it would have on you to receive a video from your team welcoming you to a new company before you even step foot in the door. Moving forward and looking at some onboarding and retention facts. As we've discussed already, and as I'm sure you already know, onboarding is such a critical time to put an employee on the right track for success. It includes information about the organization and the training that they need to be successful in the role, but it also has an overwhelming impact on their intent to stay with the organization. In fact, 69% of candidates say that the first day on the job will impact their decision to stay more than a month, and 71% of respondents said that the entire onboarding experience will impact their decision to stay more than a year. You know, let's face it, the nature of work is changing. We no longer work in a culture that expects long tenure. We have to create the environment that fosters that retention, and a positive onboarding experience is crucial. So in order to fully engage new hires, I recommend beginning performance recognition early. You can start by outlining your business goals, determining how employees influence those goals, and then design a recognition solution to communicate and reward positive outcomes. This really communicates to employee, you know, this is where the organization is headed, and here is how you help us get there. It's a huge selling point, especially for millennials. They really want to understand their role in an organization and how they fit into the bigger picture. Once the program is designed, employees may earn non-monetary recognition, such as e-cards or badges, maybe spotlights on internal social feeds, or for larger, more impactful results, employees typically redeem for exciting rewards. As I mentioned before, performance recognition is a great tool to use during the recruitment phase, a way to integrate new hires into the organization, and ultimately to align your workforce to work towards those same organizational goals, all while creating a fun atmosphere and generating team spirit. And I'm sure you'll agree, the sooner you can generate that energy, the better. So I just wanted to share 3 quick onboarding ideas that I've seen work well in other organizations. First, on the left, you see an example of a card that accompanies a stainless steel tumbler as an onboarding gift. So it has the swag with it, it's a functional item, but I really just wanted to highlight this card. You know, I love the message that it gives. You've joined a different kind of company. It shares statistics about the organization as well as their mission statement and values. And it's a great example of welcoming new employees with a gift while sharing more information about your culture. The second example is a communication strategy designed to highlight the company values and goals throughout the first year. So on day 1, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 1 year, employees receive a quick note thanking them for being part of the team and sharing some insight into their values. Just like in the last example, it's indoctrinating the employee into the culture, but touching them throughout the first year instead of only on day 1. And then lastly, I've also worked with an organization that had a very unique gift for day 1. This particular company had a very traditional culture, and they reward employees with lapel pins for things such as their service milestones, major project completions, and other occasions. On the employee's first day, they present what they call the gift of tradition. It's a beautiful display box that can be put on a desktop or hung on your wall, and employees can display all of the pins that they receive throughout the career. But their first pin is included as an onboarding gift, and there's a letter welcoming the employee to the organization, but also explaining that they really believe that that first day is just the beginning of a career that will develop over time, and that they want that display case to serve as a keepsake and a memory piece for all that they accomplished throughout their career. You know, I think it's a great way to say, we want you to build your career here. So I love that it's a foundational piece that continues on. These unique examples, you know, show you how you can onboard employees the right way, but after day 1, you're not off the hook yet. After a new hire is officially integrated into your organization, recognition and acknowledgement of efforts, including loyalty, should continue. Organizations with formal length of service programs enjoy engagement scores that are an incredible 25 points higher, and we all know the value of engagement. Employees who are engaged and apply that discretionary effort that Jeff talked about earlier have lower rates of absenteeism, are more productive, and ultimately produce better business results. Your onboarding program is that firm foundation on which to build your other recognition initiatives. If you'd like to have more ideas on how to make onboarding an effective part of your talent management strategy, be on the lookout for our latest ebook. We will send you a link after the webcast, and it's full of onboarding ideas with the supporting research that we've discussed today. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Daria.
Thank you. So, Nissa, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a lot of questions that have come in throughout the webinar, and I encourage anyone that does have any questions to put it in the question box so we can answer it. And we have a good amount of time to get towards our questions. So I'll go ahead and start. Bruce asks, what about the legality of pre-boarding? Since they aren't being paid yet, can we legally ask them to do any work?
Now, that's a great question, because it does impact a lot of organizations. And as I speak to them, especially, say, in healthcare, where there's lots of rules and regulations and compliance, there are issues related to that. So, every organization within the industry, it varies from industry to industry, and it varies from organization to organization. But even some of the ones that really have the most strict compliance requirements are trying to at least introduce people to their managers. Maybe they're not completing paperwork, but at least the welcome and the thank you, and maybe not asking them to do any work or complete any specific paperwork or until after they finished everything. At least you could possibly give them some ideas about what to expect when they onboard, what types of material they have to bring, who they're going to be working for, that you welcome them, that you're looking forward to their contributions. I really think that, there's some degree there that you can make an effort to do some recognition work ahead of time, but you always should look at what your own legality requirements are. That's what I've seen in the market. Does anybody?
We have a question from Christopher, and he asks, for recognition and pre-boarding, does the media in which a new employee is welcomed to the company matter much according to your research? Specifically, are there differences between receiving phone calls versus emails versus text versus social media?
I think that's a great question. I don't have a concrete answer for that. And I think it probably varies by the type of employee, whether they're on social media, whether they want that kind of recognition. And what my advice there would be is to find out ahead of time, whether the employee would be willing to share information on social media with the organization, because not all employees want to be recognized in the same way. I think that possibly a good guideline would be, how have you been communicating with the candidate, and how quickly have they been responding, and use that approach. I don't know, Jeff, do you have any other suggestions?
No, that's exactly how I would have answered it too, Daria. I think the preference of the individual really matters, and I think it's good to be consistent. So I think that's a great response.
One additional point that I will add in is I think that the ability to make it personal is key. So I'm not sure that the medium, whether it's email or phone call, would make as big of a difference. but really tailoring it to that employee, something that you know about them, and making it personal to them is going to have a much bigger impact than just a generic message that's pushed out.
Awesome. We had two questions that are kind of related. One from Nicole that she asked, what's the best way to get buy-in from leadership for the investment costs associated with this? And also Deanna asked, what is a budget? What budget do successful organizations apply to employee engagement and recognition?
Emily, do you want to take that one in terms of talking a little bit about the ROI and how to best communicate that to leadership from a experience of working with clients?
Sure. I mean, I think, what I've seen other organizations is really just presenting the facts and the research. And when you look at the cost of turnover in your specific organization or cost of absenteeism, the recruitment cost, and look at what other high-performing organizations are doing, really becomes a business imperative where it's just we really need to do this in order to produce better hires, to get the people on board faster and then to keep them there longer. As far as overall budgeting and what people apply, I think if I recall correctly, the question was worded as to recognition in general. There are a lot of different stats out there. World at Work, I believe I've seen between 1% and 2% of payroll. $100 per head per year are some benchmarks that are pretty widespread and well adopted. During the onboarding phase, really it varies greatly within different organizations, and a lot of times it depends on the level of employee as well. So as you might imagine, if you have a higher position, maybe it's someone on your leadership team, an executive that's going to have a higher salary range, but also a bigger cost to the organization if that person were to leave, then typically we see organizations invest more in that onboarding gift and experience than in the hourly rates. Great question.
And Daria, in the Brandon Hall research, if I'm not mistaken, I think we saw that about 7% of the talent management spend was around recognition and engagement. Is that correct?
I think so. I think you're right. And of course, that probably varies by size of organization and the size of the budget. But yeah, I think that's a good guideline.
Speaking of size, Lori asks, what do you suggest for smaller organizations with intermittent turnover to structure onboarding?
Okay, so that's a great question. And so by intermittent turnover means to say that maybe your hiring is not as extensive as other organizations. So I think in terms of that, establishing your onboarding program, I think you may want to start onboarding to a certain extent on a continuous basis, maybe the new hire welcome and special one-day activities and have their pre-boarding, but then save up the rest until more new hires come in, and so that you can do a group new hire onboarding. So, that could really vary by organization and by the type of position. So it's kind of difficult to give a one simple response without knowing all the details of your organization. And even if you're smaller, it could be that you have remote employees. So there's a lot of things that go into that. And I think even for smaller organizations, it would be a good idea to have some sort of onboarding solution and onboarding portal where onboarding, even though it's for fewer employees, it's still done on a consistent basis, which I think is, for some organizations a challenge. I don't know, Jeff, Emily, do you have any other suggestions without knowing the details of the organization?
Yeah, I think that's consistent with what we would recommend as well, Daria.
Great. Mauricio asks, do you think that this could be applied to a language company? And if so, how would you suggest to apply it?
And so by a language company, you're talking about like a company that, like translation services, that type of company? I think it can be applied to any company, really. I mean, whether it's one language or multiple languages, your welcome message, the way you introduce new hires, is really important. And whether it's done in one language or multiple languages, I think the process is still the same. I don't know whether you're a global company, whether that might impact it, but I think the process would be the same in terms of pre-boarding the new hire, welcoming them in their language, doing introductions in multiple languages. It's hard to know without really knowing the company.
I agree. I think, as we've said, it's not one size fits all. I don't think that we can say, hey, here's the silver bullet that will work for every organization. But I think that overall, the themes that we've talked about, the research that we've discussed, and some of the ideas really do apply no matter the organization. And, you just have to think through it and work with your team or work with consultants to make it fit your culture and your demographics.
Great. Christina asks, what do you feel works best for remote employees without access to a computer?
I think,
yes.
Really, I'll jump here too. I think,
right.
A couple things. I think really making that great first impression that Emily mentioned earlier in the presentation is very important. So because they may not be able to be at an office for day one, ideally it'd be great to get them at a physical location where they can socialize with other colleagues on day one, but that's not always possible. So I think that first impression is really, really key. I also think just in terms of making sure that they're productive, making sure that you're giving them the right technology and tools to be able to communicate effectively with members in the organization. At Engage2Excel, we really, from an internal perspective, think a lot about how to engage remote employees in conference calls or webcasts, perhaps using video. So there's a lot of ways that you can engage from a technology and communication perspective, but it has to be planned. It can't be an afterthought. So those are a couple nuggets.
Thank you, Jeff. We have another question from Karen that asks, how can this be implemented for general labor where offer to start date is relatively quick?
Well, I think then you're in a really great advantageous position. So you definitely can send the welcome letter, whether it's email or whichever media you decide to use, and that letter can describe, what they're to expect, and that you're happy to see them come on board and look forward to their contribution, etc. And then when they come on board, then you can have a really dynamic onboarding session. But I mean, if the time between the offer letter and the first day of work is only a few days, there's really only a limited amount of things that you can do. But you definitely still need that welcome letter and maybe a personal phone call to welcome them and look forward to them arriving, because I think, that's really important. Are there any other questions?
I think we're good. We're just hitting now 2 o'clock, so I just wanted to say thank you again to Daria, Jeff, and Emily for taking time out to explore this topic with our attendees. In 48 hours, everyone who attended this webinar will receive access to the recording and slides. Any final thoughts from the crew?
Thank you, everyone. This has been great.
And thanks for the great participation and questions, too. Very exciting. Thank you so much.